Imagine a peaceful river running through the countryside. That's your river of well-being. Whenever you're in the water, peacefully floating along in your canoe, you feel like you're generally in a good relationship with the world around you. You have a clear understanding of yourself, other people, and your life. You can be flexible and adjust when situations change. You're stable and at peace. Sometimes, though, as you float along, you veer too close to one of the river's two banks. This causes different problems depending on which bank you approach. One bank represents chaos, where you feel out of control. Instead of floating in the peaceful river, you are caught up in the pull of tumultuous rapids, and confusion and turmoil rule the day. You need to move away from the bank of chaos and get back into the gentle flow of the river. But don't go too far, because the other bank presents its own dangers. It's the bank of rigidity, which is the opposite of chaos. As opposed to being out of control, rigidity is when you are imposing control on everything and everyone around you. You become completely unwilling to adapt, compromise, or negotiate. Near the bank of rigidity, the water smells stagnant, and the reeds and tree branches prevent your canoe from flowing in the river of well-being. So one is extreme chaos, where there's total lack of control. The other is extreme rigidity, where there's too much control, leading to a lack of flexibility and adaptability. We all move back and forth between these two banks as we go through our days, especially when we're trying to survive parenting. When we're closest to the banks of chaos or rigidity, we're farthest from mental and emotional health. The longer we can avoid either bank, the more time we spend enjoying the river of well-being. Much of our lives as adults can be seen as moving along these paths, sometimes in the harmony of the flow of well-being, but sometimes in chaos, in rigidity, or zigzagging back and forth between the two. Harmony emerges from integration. Chaos and rigidity arise when integration is blocked. That's a quote from Dan Siegel talking about parenting. Hi, this is Sara Russell. I'm your Microdose host, here with your weekly mood boost and tools for transformation. In today's episode, I'll be answering a listener question that has to do with how to cultivate resiliency as a parent while you're raising a family that's dealt with trauma in some way.
Hi, Sara. My question is, how do I continue to work on my own resiliency when I also am raising small children who have been through trauma and we're trying to build their resiliency? It's really difficult because when they start struggling, it triggers my struggling, and I'm trying to build resilience, and they're able to knock me off so easily that it takes a while to get back on track. So how do we all grow resiliency at the same time when we're all still working through trauma? Thanks.
First of all, I want to say I am so sorry for the harm that both you and your children have experienced. I wished we live in a world where we were all safe, and it completely makes sense to me that you would be struggling when they struggle. You love your kids and you hurt when they hurt, and on top of dealing with their hurt, you're dealing with your own hurt. So no wonder this is tough. Plus, on top of all that empathy, we have these neurons in our body. They're called mirror neurons. And these neurons fire either when we're acting or when we're observing somebody else acting. So when you're feeling triggered or when your kids are feeling triggered, your mirror neurons are going to be bouncing off of each other, and you're going to be reflecting your experiences back to each other. And it feels like a little bit like a hall of mirrors, right? Like in a fun house, although obviously not very fun. It's terrible, right? But you're reflecting your experiences back to each other. And so that can really amplify the tension or the disharmony in the room in some way. So here's the thing. Our trauma responses, our trigger responses, are instinctual responses, and those responses move hundreds of times faster than our mental processes. So trying to deal with this from the mind isn't going to be as effective as bringing the body on as an ally in all of this. But when we're in the middle of a trauma response, we tend to intellectualize it in some way, and we tend to individualize it as well. We go, this happened to me. Is it my fault in some way? And then we start trying to analyze and evaluate whether or not we made a good move or a bad move, a right decision or a wrong decision. And this evaluation can make us start shaming and blaming ourselves as if it was our fault that the trauma happened to us in some way. And by doing that, we really sap our energy, and that leaves us less resource to recenter. Plus, it's a really life-draining belief, this idea that it's our fault that something bad happened to us in some way. And it makes sense that we make that move because it's really hard to accept our powerlessness in that moment, right? Like, if it's our fault in some way, if we did something wrong, if we did too much or not enough of something, or we made a bad move, or we made a bad decision in some way, then that's our fault, and that's something we can fix in ourselves, and that means we can fix our powerlessness, and that means we can keep ourselves safe from harm ever happening to us again. But that's not the reality. The truth of it is that we can't always keep ourselves safe, and we can't control other people's behaviors, and sometimes things happen to us that we had no control over whatsoever. And so by trying to make ourselves responsible for the harm that happened to us, we're actually like just wasting a bunch of energy, and we're not opening ourselves up to all the moves that are actually available to start healing. Once we accept the unacceptable, that harm happened, and we stop shaming and blaming ourselves, we can actually start building our energy back up. We can start cultivating resources and skill sets, and we can actually build more power in that moment. So the very first move is to accept that you and your kids are not going to stop having your instinctual responses. Those responses are there because they're trying to keep you safe. They're trying to make sure that harm never happens to you again. And it's a very primal wiring in your brain that you're not actually going to be able to talk or think yourself out of. So having lots of compassion with yourself for whatever response you're having, knowing that your body's trying to keep you safe in some way, even if it's not necessarily the most effective or functional way of responding to this situation. So acceptance is the first step, right? Accepting the unacceptable. Then once you accept that you're powerless over the trauma that happened to you, powerless over your instinctual response, that's actually where all of your choice opens up. So the first moment of choice that you have is noticing that you're experiencing powerlessness in some way. So maybe something happens in the environment that reminds you of your trauma in some way. Being able to notice, oh, I'm triggered, I'm feeling powerless in that moment. Noticing it is the first step. Then after you notice it, you want to name it. You want to start labeling it in some way. So what happens to you or your kids when you're getting triggered? Does your heart start beating faster? Does your breath get shaky? Do your palms get sweaty? Do you start to dissociate it? Dan Siegel, who I was reading the opening quote from, has this phrase, name it to tame it. As we start building awareness, as we observe ourselves, we actually create a little bit more spaciousness in the body. And that spaciousness is what allows us to make different choices to our instinctual survival responses. Then what you're going to want to do is ask yourself, what do I need? And I want you to be thinking about this in terms of physically, right? So rather than like, maybe you need to move your body away from something, but really what we're doing is we're going to be talking to the limbic system. And the limbic system is all about sensation and physical intensity. So we want to make sure we're speaking to the limbic system in a language that it understands, which is sensation. So you as a parent might know what you need physically. You might not know. And the likelihood that your kids are going to know, like maybe they're going to know what they need, but likely you're going to have to scaffold this for them. And so you're going to have to offer them some choices. And so some of the things that you can do for yourself, some of the things that you can do for your kids, again, like tracking physical sensation in a way that's soothing. You might want to brush your hair or brush their hair. You might want to do some push-ups. You might want to go for a run. You might want to take a sip of something hot or something cool. And I know when I was working in special education, I was working in a special education preschool, we had these really sweet areas where kids could go when they needed to get rid of some of the agitation that was happening in their bodies from whatever had set them off for whatever reason. So for instance, we had some handprints up on a wall where when the kids were feeling agitated, they could go and push their hands really firmly against the wall. We also had this super sweet thing that I wish I had in my room. I'm not going to lie. It was this kind of sack, this bag that the kids could crawl into, but it was really stretchy. And so there was some resistance when they would crawl in, and they could push their limbs against it as they were stretching around, and they'd get some of that pressure feedback. So they had something to push against. You might also want to draw bullseyes on a fence and then throw rocks at the bullseyes. But you're going to want to do something physical in these moments rather than trying to rationalize or logic or talk yourselves down in some way. And you're certainly not going to want to be shaming yourselves, going like, making yourselves crazy, right? Like, why do we feel this way? We're safe in this moment. I wish we were over this. That kind of like wanting to hustle through our healing in some way, wishing we were somewhere other than we were. accept where you are, accept the fact that you're triggered, and then do something physically intense as a way to self-regulate and as a way to self-soothe. The main thing I want you to get out from all of this is to stop being so hard on yourselves. And by not being so hard on yourselves, that's actually going to open up energy for more choices, for you to learn the skill sets that you need to do. And some of those skill sets might include, like what we were just talking about, noticing when somebody's triggered, naming when somebody's triggered, asking yourself what you need. So being able to discern and feel and label. And something else you might want to do is practice a centering practice in some way, or some like cultivating spaciousness in some way. And you're going to want to practice your centering practice repeatedly throughout the day so that the next moment you're triggered, you already have this embodied experience of being centered. So it's easier to reach for that tool in the moment. You're not waiting until the moment that you're triggered to practice centering. You're practicing centering all day, every day. And it can be really helpful to tie your centering practice to something that's happening throughout the day. So for instance, when you get up in the morning and you make your morning beverage and you're pouring them their drinks, you're going to want to tune in to physical sensation in some way. And so this might be as simple as tuning into your 5 senses while you're drinking your morning beverages. So what does it look like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What are you hearing as you're drinking your morning beverages? And by focusing on one of those senses, every time you take a sip, you're coming back into your body, and the body exists in the present moment, right? The mind can time travel back to the past where something terrible happened. It can time travel into the future where it's worried that it's going to happen again. But the body is always in the present moment. And so by tuning into one of those senses, you're coming back to your body, coming back to the present moment. And you're observing yourself and your environment around you. And that observation, that witnessing is actually what allows you to respond to your environment from a place of choice rather than just respond from instinct. So stop making your trauma responses something wrong that you need to fix. They're there for good reason, and shaming yourself isn't going to change them. And instead, notice how your bodies have shaped themselves around their trauma. And as you witness how they're shaping themselves around their trauma, see if you can start practicing a more life-affirming response. And with practice, your speed around this will increase, and you'll be able to recenter more quickly. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen. It really helps me keep creating content for you. It lets the big mushroom heads at Mudwater know that you like this work and that you want more of it. Also, you can check out trendswithbenefits.com for all of our written work and also sign up for our weekly newsletter there. And if you have any relationship questions that you would like help with, like I just answered during this podcast, please send in a voice memo. I would be happy to offer you support. So you can record it on your phone, and then you can email it to podcast@mudwtr.com, and I can offer you some free help. And excitingly, MUD has a new product that supports immunity, vitality, and mental sharpness. It's a boost that contains a blend of 8 mushrooms, including reishi, the mushroom of immortality, and mycelium, which you know connects us all. And the mushrooms are all USDA certified organic. And for my listeners, I get to offer you the gift of a discount code. You can use the code BOOST25, BOOST 25, for 25% off your first order of Mushroom Boost. All right, go easy on yourselves. It's tough out there.